These instructional videos are meant to help the user set up the MVM ventilator for patient ventilation. So the first things to do, and we will show in video 1, is the setup and the startup procedures. So to set up the ventilator, it has been unpacked. The rear of the unit consists of the protective cover for the on-off switch for the ventilator. This is for remote alarms. There's a port for a USB key, the pneumatic source for the ventilator. This is the emergency intake should the ventilator fail completely. The patient can breathe from here. This is a high pressure relief valve, as is this. Located underneath is the power battery pack. The outlet for the plugging into the electrical source is located here and would be plugged into the institution's electrical power. On the power unit underneath the ventilator, there is an on-off or a 0 and 1 position for this switch. It should always be on in the 1 position. The short gray tube is attached from the power unit to the ventilator at this point here. The cable from the battery pack is fit into the MVM unit, and it's secured in and locked in. To further create a safe environment so that this cord can never be removed from the unit, a sleeve can fit over here and adjusted and secured with this screw. The MVM does not have an internal battery, therefore it's vital that this is never disconnected so that there would be battery backup in the event of an electrical failure. This is the blender. Yeah. These are the gas sources that come from the hospital institutional source. The blended gas then comes out and enters the ventilator here. The patient circuit that comes with the MVM ventilator consists of the following components. The inspiratory limb, the long tubing here, is attached to the Y piece, which then has a flow sensor with 2 lines that need to be attached, the heat and moisture exchanger filter. After that, a short piece of tubing, followed by the patient connection adapter. On the expiratory limb, we see the shorter expiratory limb, including the expiratory valve and the PEEP valve. The circuit needs to be attached to the ventilator in a very specific way. The long inspiratory limb will be attached to the patient port that is located right here. The flow sensors need to be attached very specifically as well. The blue line corresponds to the blue line on the flow sensor. It's closest to the patient, and it would need to be attached here. The clear line of the flow sensor, the line closest to the ventilator, would need to be attached here. 2 more lines need to be attached. One is the pressure sensing line, which is attached underneath with a green corresponding color. And the expiratory valve needs to be attached via this port here. Okay, so that confirms and controls the expiratory valve. So there's 5 attachments to be done. The large patient port, the 2 flow sensors corresponding color-coded from the flow sensor, the green pressure sensor, and the clear expiratory valve line. The setup procedure has now been completed. The ventilator has been attached to the pneumatic sources, the electrical sources, circuit has been assembled and attached correctly to the ventilator. We're about to start the startup procedure. Before doing that, it's vitally important that this part of the circuit is removed so the circuit is completely open for 0 calibration to be able to take place. also important is that there is no patient attached for these procedures. To turn the unit on, this protective cover is lifted and the button is turned to the on position. A 30-second power up will ensue, after which time we can proceed with the startup procedures. And 3 lights will power on right here. The power, the two different levels of alarms, and that's quite normal. Once this screen opens, there's 2 possible options for the operator. One is to pick new patient. The other is to pick resume ventilation. Resume ventilation, if the unit has been off for less than 15 minutes, will actually pick up the settings that were previously used. New patient is going to take the operator through all the self-tests that need to be done prior to ventilation. We're going to pick new patient, and the screen indicates all the tests that need to be done prior to ventilation. O2 calibration, self-test, flow sensor calibration, settings, alarms. If you notice, under each of them right now, the text "to be completed" is there. Once the test has been done, that disappears and the text turns green to indicate it has been successfully completed. Starting with the O2 calibration. Push on that tab brings us to this screen. All the instructions are written on the screen, simply to follow. So the patient is of course disconnected and the circuit is left open. The blender must be turned to 21% and start calibration begins. This bar indicates the length of, or the amount that the test has taken place, and when 100% of that test has been completed, will either indicate as a success or failure for this test. 100% completed, the test was successful. On to the next test by pressing exit. The next test is the self-test. The self-test consists of 4 other tests. The leak test is one of the first tests in the self-test. The leak test is very important to ensure that the circuit has no leaks. Follow the directions on the screen, connect the circuit, and plug the end of the circuit with a cap. The cap keeps the circuit clean. Hold the cap fairly firmly and begin the check. Once 100% of the check has been completed, success, that test has been finished. Continue. The next check is the flow sensor direction check. It's making sure that the operator set this correctly in the circuit. Again, follow the directions. This time it says remove the cap, make sure the circuit is open, and just press flow sensor direction check. Again, it'll run through the check. After 100% of it's done and it's successful, it's finished. We now can press continue. The backup battery check is the third of the self-tests, and in this test, it ensures that the battery will take over should the institutional power go down. Unplug the electrical from the electrical outlet. When the backup battery check has been completed, you'll note that there's a small square on the left-hand side with a number inside. The number says 0. By pressing that, it expands the message. The message says disconnected from power outlet, so it's another visual that this has occurred, and I need to reset that by pressing the blue button over here. That message now has disappeared. On to the next test, which is the alarm system checks, simply making sure that I can hear and see alarms. I touch this button. Yes, I will confirm that I see it and hear it by confirming here. I'll also notice there's another square that has opened here with a number on it. I'm going to open this and it says test alarm. I'll confirm and that disappears. We're now finished with the self-tests. On to the flow sensor calibration. The flow sensor that's recommended for this unit is the Spiraquant H. If this is the sensor you're using, you simply press Load Spiraquant H Calibration. If you are using another sensor, you will need to calibrate unknown flow sensor. The directions will be listed on the screen. So for now, load the Spiraquant flow sensor and that test is completed. The next test that we'll do is the settings. In this machine, there are two modes. One mode is called Pcv, and it stands for Pressure Control Ventilation. The other mode is called PSV, Pressure Support Ventilation. For further information concerning these modes, please look at the user manual. Before ventilating the patient, it's important to make sure the settings for each mode are correct. By touching the tab up here, we can access the settings for each mode. So if we start with the Pcv mode, we can see settings that are there. If we look on the right hand side of the screen, we can see tabs that say tap here to start. So I'm going to tap here. It brings up the first setting, which is respiratory rate. I am given a variety of settings that I could use. I can pick one of those, or I can use a plus and minus button to choose the parameter that I want. I'm going to check this one. So that one is completed. The next parameter is the inspiration to expiration ratio. Again, by tapping here, I can select one that I would like, or I can fine tune with the plus and minus buttons. I'm going to pick the default for now. The third parameter to set is the inspiratory pressure, P-insp. Again, by tapping here, it provides me with a selection I could use. I'm going to take the default for now, but if I wanted to, I can adjust that by pressing these buttons here. The last parameter to set is the sensitivity, ITS, Inspiratory Trigger Sensitivity. Again, tap here, provides me with a selection of parameters I might want to use. I'm going to choose default, and it's there. All of these have now been set, and I can now apply PCV. That means I'm confirming those settings and confirm yes. That PCV settings has been done. I must go now and do all the settings for pressure support ventilation. The same type of menu is shown. For pressure support ventilation, there are fewer parameters to set. The first one that is shown is the inspiratory trigger sensitivity, ITS. The same procedure. I tap on that. I'm presented with some selections. I'm going to select default, but I could use the plus and minus to adjust that if I wish to. Going farther down, the next setting to set is ETS, which is expiratory trigger sensitivity, for the cycle of the pressure support breath. Again, tapping here brings me up to a selection. I'm going to press default, and that one is done. The third parameter or setting to set in pressure support ventilation is the pressure. It is called support P-insp, the pressure for pressure support. Again, tapping here provides me with that selection. I'm going to press the default, and those three are done. There's another section of settings that I must set for pressure support ventilation. These are what is called the apnea parameters. In this mode, and if the patient stops breathing, the ventilator will automatically switch to pressure control ventilation. These parameters then must be set. So the first one is the interval. How long will the patient not be breathing before pressure control begins? I'm going to go with the default. The next setting is the apnea respiratory rate. Tap, choose. And the last one is the pressure that's going to be used should the patient stop breathing. Tap, select a pressure, and that is done. At this point, I've checked all the parameters. I'm going to now apply PSV. I'm going to confirm, and I'm now going to go, it says at the bottom, this is a nice message in green that says all settings confirmed. I've done all the settings for pressure control and all the settings for pressure support. Pressing the back will bring me back to the startup screens. Settings has now been greened. It's done. One more to do, and that is the alarms. I need to review the alarms before I set the patient on this ventilator. In a sense, these are broad and safe alarms. I can fine-tune those alarms once my patient is attached. And you have all of the various alarms. The top two is not an alarm, it's just the battery percent, and the second one is a power source. It's not an alarm. But you do have measured respiratory rate, maximum inspiratory pressure, PEEP, inspiratory tidal volume, expiratory tidal volume, minute volume, and FiO2 or oxygen level. By touching the red tab, it brings me up to the rate alarm. I can choose default, or I can change the default or change the settings by simply pulling this tab across, and that changes the settings. If I like those settings, I will apply selected. And if we look back into my alarm tab over here, the new alarm settings are shown. I'm going to select those, and I'm going to go to the next one, which is the maximum inspiratory pressure. Again, I can choose default settings, or I can change the settings by dragging these bars for minimum and maximum. Even if I were to choose default settings, I still have to apply. That's done, and I'm ready to move to the next one, and that maximum pressure has been gone back to black. The next one is PEEP. The PEEP alarm, again, would be set either by choosing default, which are settings that are factory set, or again, I can drag these tabs to collect or set what I want. Apply selected has to be always done, and I go on to the next one, which is the inspiratory tidal volume. Same thing, I can either use the default settings or I can change them as I wish. Either way, I need to apply them. So I'm going to apply the defaults. Next one is the expiratory tidal volume. Same thing, I can either choose the default settings or I can change them as I wish, and I apply. Next one, minute volume, same thing. I can choose default or I can adjust as I wish and apply. And the last one is the FiO2. The oxygen is not an alarm per se. In here, this needs to be set exactly what the blender is setting. So if I have 21 on the blender, I need to set 21 here. If I have 30 on the blender, I need to set 30 here. The machine will actually automatically set 3% higher and 3% lower as the alarm. So I've done this, I've applied, and I'm now ready. At the bottom it says all alarm thresholds confirmed in green, and I'm ready to take me back to the startup page everything is in green, so I've completed everything. I am now going to press the proceed button, and it brings me to this screen. To continue to learn about preparing the MVM for patient ventilation, please watch video 2, which shows how to prepare the settings, how to test the alarms, and the operation of the MVM.